Welcome to another special MentorCore event. We are thrilled to be with you again this Wednesday. This week, we have Bob Mascola, professor from Fordham. We are going to be talking about the professionalization of the compliance and ethics careers. But before we get to that, MentorCore is a community for compliance, security, and risk professionals to grow and develop at your own pace. We have mentoring, connecting, a lot of content and special resources for members. And then we have free events for the community like this today. My name is Lisa Beth Lentini Walker. I am a compliance, ethics, and corporate governance strategist. I run Lumen Worldwide Endeavors as my consulting firm, but I also am the co-founder of MentorCore. And my co-founder here, Dan, why don't you introduce yourself?
See, you chuckle when you say co-founder. I don't know how to take that. Hi, everybody. I'm Dan Ayala. I'm a recovering chief information security officer and chief privacy officer. And by recovering, I mean I'm still doing it, but now as a consultant for my company, Socratic. This is every week. We get through MentorCore, we get the chance to meet with wonderful people and hear and learn so much. I have not, we're what, 35, 36, 37 weeks into this, episodes into this even. And I do not think a week has gone by that I haven't learned an immense amount. And so no pressure, Bob. But yeah, we're here. We're here again today to do the same. So thank you all for being here. And I'd like to introduce you all to Bob Mascola. Bob, welcome.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Lisa Beth.
So Bob is a professor at Fordham Law, but also he's been a huge part of the Compliance Career Connection program that a number of us have been part of, and a number of you have been part of, for people that are looking for jobs and those that can help people that are looking for jobs. So Bob, just off the top, thank you so much for being part of that and contributing and helping put people into jobs. I know across the program we've seen 5 or 6 or 7 people already that have been able to be matched with that have come upon others and have resulted in jobs. So thanks to those of you that are
Oh,
participating, and thanks to you, Bob, for being part of it.
thanks. I just first of all, you're overstating my contributions, which you're allowed to do. That's okay. But I think it's when I discovered MentorCore, which is probably a few months after you started it, I just was amazed. And so congratulations to you both for co-founding this. And when I learned about it, I promoted it heavily to my students because I think it's a type of it's the type of network uh, or type of community that can really be beneficial throughout a career. So thank you for starting this, and I'm pleased to have this opportunity to talk with you guys today.
Great.
So start by telling us a little bit about you, Bob. We want to know what brought you into compliance, what you're doing right now, because I know that not everybody on the call has actually met you in person. So tell us a
Right.
little bit about what your path towards this
Yeah.
was.
So for 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 those who are in my age group, which may be nobody who's on the call or listening, nobody started out wanting to be in compliance. My career, a legal career, started out with in a law firm doing antitrust work, and antitrust work was a lot of litigation, a lot of merger defense, white collar defense work, and then some counseling work. It was the counseling work that got me most excited. There was this opportunity that I had towards the end of this major antitrust review that I did for a company. It was kind of a dream assignment and kind of got me hooked. I got to travel across the globe to look at global procurement practices. Ended up after that process, going to Switzerland to report my findings to the senior management team. And after that, that led to a job. So my first in-house role uh, left took me from DC law firm to Lausanne, Switzerland. That was at Philip Morris International, and it was a terrific experience. It wasn't in compliance; it was in-house law, but managing. I was the subject matter expert, even though I didn't have the expertise outside of antitrust, but became the subject matter expert for all sorts of areas, including privacy, anti-corruption, sanctions. And so help run the programs, help make sure that the lawyers had somebody to go to if they had any questions. But after 3 years, the opportunity came up to move to New York and run the compliance function for North and South America, and that's where it launched. It was supposed to be for 2 years or so, and then that was 12 years ago.
Funny
So
how that works.
yeah, it's funny how
Right.
that works. I fell in love with it, and it was something where I felt like I was really contributing. I was integrated with all aspects of the business. I loved being, I loved the team. I loved developing people, being part of a global strategy. And then at some point, I switched over to a mining company. That was also a fantastic opportunity. You don't get a much more challenging from a compliance perspective sector than mining. Um, really loved that. It was just bad timing because it was a merger, and so fell victim of a merger shortly after I started. It was only 5 months there. Did a lot in those 5 months, but it was disappointing. Um, and then, as I was looking for my next opportunity, I got this um, opportunity that came from left field, which is how about helping to run a compliance program at Fordham Law School. And it was interesting. I had thought about teaching, but this was actually running their graduate education program. So Fordham already had some programs for lawyers, for LLM degrees, for non-lawyers, what's now a newer Master of Studying Laws program. They had those on campus, but the growth was in figuring out a way to deliver these online, and I took that opportunity and ran with it, and it's been great. It's been, as I like to say, um, compliance officers are a lot of things, but they're not revenue generators. And here I am at an opportunity to be entrepreneurial in a very kind of safe setting, to be honest, but entrepreneurial and kind of thinking about what the growth strategy is, and how we can carry out our mission in a way that brings in students, brings in revenue. So it was really exciting, and I've been there for about a year and a half.
Wow.
That's
Wow,
great.
and the stuff that you're doing there, I mean, I've seen, you have an all-star group of professors, and you're doing really interesting programming. Your ESG series was fascinating, and I think it's really important for compliance officers.
Mhm.
So bravo to you. What changes do you see in compliance education?
Well, it's expanding. I would say, well, if you look back 5 years ago, there wasn't compliance education really. And this kind of relates to the whole developments in the compliance field. Uh, the compliance education that existed was, content that was delivered by professional associations. Um, what you're seeing now, though, is more content. Both business schools and law schools are getting into the game, teaching. They come at from different perspectives. So the law firms, so the business schools tend to come at from a risk perspective, and will have degrees in risk management.
Mhm.
And the law schools come at it more from a legal and regulatory perspective. Although this is an area that is certainly ripe for collaboration between law schools and business schools because it's right at the intersection. And well, I haven't seen that much yet, but I guess where the growth is, and I think there's still a lot of growth, is reaching a broader audience and bringing a more rigorous training for compliance to more people. There's a lot to learn in compliance, and I think the working professionals often realize that they just don't have the, there's some gap in their knowledge, and they want to dedicate time to to close those gaps, to gain a level of expertise, and programs like the one that I run and others are helping to fill that gap, and I think contributing to this issue of professionalization, which is the theme for today.
So tell me a little bit more about the professionalization of compliance and ethics. You're right. I didn't wake up, when I was, 5 years old and say I want to grow up to be a compliance officer. They didn't exist back then. I mean, not to like.
Yeah.
I mean, I wasn't walking with the dinosaurs, but I mean, like, it wasn't really a thing when I was a kid.
Wow. And then when it became a thing, many people kind of went into compliance reluctantly. So that was my case. So I was offered to leave law to go into compliance. The company I was with at the time had them separate, and they were one of the early companies to have them separate. And I was very concerned about leaving the law department. It helped that it was in New York, and I said, "Oh, okay, let's go to New York." And that was, I thought, a big attractive part, and then I fell in love with it. But in terms of the professionalization, I think if you think of what the professions are, I mean, professions. You think of the quintessential professions. It can be a doctor, it can be a lawyer, or other healthcare provider. It can be an accountant, an electrician. Those are all professions. And then you think, well, where does compliance fit in, right? And in some parts it's there, and in some parts it's not there. And so I just ask myself, and I don't have the answers, and this is all part of a discussion. So I'm very interested in some thoughts from listeners. But there are aspects of compliance that make it look like a profession, and increasingly that's the case. So where did it start? It started with um, compliance in the early days was lawyers doing compliance on the side, but looking at it as part of their law duty. Um, Gradually, companies saw that there were skills that weren't focused on legal skills that made a compliance department work, and they started to expand. There was gradually a understanding that there were some benefits to having some level of independence for compliance that started the separation from the law function from compliance. So, what you ended up with is more companies having a compliance function, and more of those functions um, at least having some level of separation from law, and including people who weren't lawyers. And so, as that became more and more, people started to see that there's a career path in compliance. And so that's kind of let's say, the beginning stages of having a profession, people seeing that there's a career path, and that career path isn't just a lawyer path.
Mhm.
And so that's I think where we started, and that was probably 15 years ago. And it really varies by sector where you are. There were certain sectors that were early adopters, others came later. Um, but we're still in the early stages, I say, of being a profession. And the question is, what other steps are we, does it take for it to become a profession, or is it going to take other steps? Are we going to pass through other steps to become a more recognized profession? It's an open question. I think there are a couple other aspects of what characterizes a profession. So one are certifications, you know,
Mhm.
and potentially licensing. Then there's education, and where are we on certifications? Uh, we have different levels, different bodies providing different certifications. It's kind of like ESG, different standards,
Oh, there's different
right?
standards. There's
Right.
a lot of certifications you can get if you try. I mean, you could spend all your time getting certifications.
Um, and that's okay. It doesn't have to be uniform, but other professions have more uniformity, right?
Right.
And there are accrediting bodies for who can give out um, a certification. So not everybody can open up shop and say, we're giving out a certification and have it be recognized. It has to be an accredited program.
Hmm.
So it could be that we get there on certifications, um, but then more formally, education. All professions, not all professions, but a characteristic aspect of a profession is that there is an educational path. And there hasn't been an educational path for compliance. It's just been go to law school. But as the profession opens up to people who aren't lawyers, what is the career path? And so you have these programs emerging to address that gap, but also even for people who are lawyers to say, law school doesn't teach you a certain set of skills. Let's have a program that will teach you these skills.
Hmm.
And so lawyers who want to come back and do some an additional year can come back and get compliance specific skills and a better understanding of relevant legal regulatory frameworks from a compliance perspective. So that is certainly a part of it. But then there's another piece, um, and I don't know where this is going to go, but most professions have, um, both professional associations that represent the profession, and they have professional codes of ethics. And those professional codes of ethics actually have some teeth behind them. And so you think of lawyers. What do lawyers have? The rules of professional conduct, and that and physicians and other healthcare workers have similar codes, but you honestly have that for many professions, that there are engineers have a code of professional ethics, and um, there is, believe it or not, a code of professional ethics out there. It's not anything that I'm aware of that has much in the way of, um, I guess, it's not universal. It doesn't have any teeth behind it. It's more aspirational. And so the question is, do we get to the point where there is a common code of ethics for the compliance profession that, you think of the people in the profession that have existed for a long time who are lawyers are already subject to a professional code,
Hmm. And
right?
you can lose your license to
And you can lose your
practice.
license. What happens in the future when many more of the leaders in the field are not lawyers? What is the professional code that they are subject to?
Right.
And it's unclear what the answer to that is, but I would like to see a development in the area of a professional code. And I've actually been talking to some people about making this happen. There is, as I said, there is one that's out there. I think it's pretty good. It's been there for, believe it or not, for over a decade. And it's remained unchanged since then. It started with the healthcare sector, then it
Hmm.
was expanded to the general profession. But I think there's more to be done. And then, I think certification may be being tied to a commitment to the code of professional ethics, and then
Yes.
having some sort of body that is or mechanism for policing the profession. Will we get there? I think we'll get there. I don't know how quick it's going to be, but I wouldn't be surprised if in 10, 15, 20 years, especially as more of the profession are non-lawyers, that there is more of a need to have a code of professional ethics.
Well,
And
I go ahead, Dan.
I was like, and I think that, the interesting part about what you said is it all resonates until you get to that last statement of what happens when it's not rooted in a historical profession that has that same ethos.
Hmm.
And I wonder if that's when this becomes moves from profession to a practice, and then it starts to look, and then that juxtaposed with business demands and business drivers will be some of the humps that have to be overcome in order to achieve that. All the great things you just described.
Well, and I kind of wonder. So I look at, for example, privacy. and I see people being named DPOs and having to meet certain standards. And I see that perhaps as an easier and earlier space where you may get to the,
Yes.
you have to be qualified and meet certain standards. And then, if you don't meet those standards or don't keep up with your education, you're no longer able to be named X, Y, or Z. I would have thought, there were a number of compliance officers who got in trouble recently for the opioid crisis and their role as compliance professionals who didn't identify problems. And that would have been a good time to talk about, hey, maybe we need to say, if you do certain things, you shouldn't be a compliance officer anymore.
Mm.
That's what we do with, I mean, frankly, that's what the SEC does with CEOs and CFOs who falsify financial information, right? So that's some of the teeth, even, right? You don't have to be certified to be a CEO, but there is a consequence if something goes wrong under your watch and at your hand.
Right. Although there isn't any regulatory, well, I guess there is a regulatory. I mean, there is this concept of chief compliance officer liability
Mhm,
that exists within financial services.
mhm.
The opioid crisis, opioid case that you're talking about, um, I guess I'd have to know more of the facts. I mean, a compliance officer can always be liable for direct involvement in misconduct. The
Mhm.
question is, can a compliance officer be liable for not having sufficient controls and processes in place
To
to
detect.
to detect and mitigate the risks? And that's again, maybe that's where it is in the opioid case. I'd have to familiarize myself more with the facts, but that's a little bit of the direction that gets compliance professionals nervous in financial services.
Right,
And if you look
right.
at the path of information security, chief information security officers, we're seeing exactly that path, where there's no there's no credentialing, there's no specific requirements, either education or certification, but there is liability in certain, well, and actually in most countries. There's liability for the person in that role, primarily around negligence or gross negligence in the role, but it's a step.
Mhm.
And I think also, if I'm remembering, so it's interesting that you guys have the backgrounds in privacy and information security, because I do see those as areas that are farther along in the development of a profession. It's very hard, I think, to get ahead in privacy without an IAPP certification.
I
Is
think
that
it depends. I
is
mean,
that
so I don't have one, and I've been able to do plenty of privacy work. I think
I'd
it just
argue it's
depends on your
harder.
background.
I'd argue it's harder to get ahead in privacy right now without a JD
I think that's probably
than
pretty
the
accurate.
certification. I think too many, and I apologize. I know there's a lot of attorneys in this. I think too many people are law focused on privacy, and excluding a whole population of people that have both the passion and the knowledge to be able to do it. This is mostly in hiring. You're seeing a lot of JD only kind of job descriptions, but there's a lot of people coming up that have that experience. So this is where you have to try and figure out that middle ground. Is it a lawyer job? Is it not a lawyer job? Or lawyer? Sorry, is it a lawyer profession or is it a non-lawyer profession?
Or is it a little bit of both?
Yeah,
yeah. So I don't know where that will go. I suspect. I think the legal landscape and the regulatory landscape on privacy is evolving so quickly
Hmm.
that there's just people are nervous. Companies would be nervous about having somebody who wasn't really adept at managing that.
Yeah.
Although you don't really have to be a lawyer to manage a privacy program if you have a partnership with a law function.
exactly. And
Right.
that for me has been my best experience is I'm not an attorney, but my best friends in all of these privacy programs we've built has been the attorney who's responsible for privacy, but they are in those cases consultative
Yep.
and not driving it, because also in some cases you have to take some walks into very vague waters because as you said it's
Yeah.
very evolving space, um,
Yeah.
and doing that together made it a lot easier.
Yeah.
Right.
And just to pick up your point on the information security uh, space, and there are lots of things that I get to learn when I read papers from my students because the course that I teach, they have to write a substantial paper before they graduate, and I get to read them. And so sometimes I read papers about um, in privacy and cybersecurity. And there was a case, I think it was Anthem, one of the early
Mhm.
breaches, big breaches, where the person in charge of information security really had no background,
Right.
uh, and she just wasn't equipped for her role. And I mean, it just tells uh, senior leaders and the board, if you're going to put somebody in that position, they better have the training. You just can't say, oh, this person knows the business. And so, I mean, it does get to the point where there's a certain level of expertise and training that goes with that expertise that are going to be required to get you in a senior role. Um, but we don't traditionally, maybe cybersecurity is a separate area, but we don't traditionally have a path for non-lawyers.
Yeah. So we've got like, I mean, the chat's lighting up and so are the Q&A. So I want to make sure that we get to some of these questions. The first one is coming in through the Q&A. How useful are master's programs in corporate compliance? The person who's asking wants to know they're presently enrolled in a master's program in global corporate compliance at university. What is your take on it? How useful are those
So
master's programs in corporate compliance?
So I mean, well, first of all, I mean, I'm not going to make a sales pitch here because that's not my role. It is not for everybody.
Yeah.
I mean, it has to be fit. Where I think it makes the most sense is for people who are already in the field and are seeing some career opportunities where they can take advantage of those opportunities or they can make more opportunities available to them if they spend the time to get a better grounding in the legal and regulatory framework and develop some skills and also have the opportunities for great networking and mentoring and those things. Where we have applicants who um, are intelligent but are not really in a position to benefit from the program, we're really reluctant. I mean, in sometimes you have to weigh, well, you know, individuals can make decisions about what kind of schooling they want, and we should, if they're qualified, they can come into the program.
Mm-hmm.
But we're really careful because sometimes people don't. I mean, this is very paternalistic, but don't quite understand what the degree is and how they can use the degree. And so we really look for the right fit. And for a lot of our students who, whose careers are at a certain level, but they want to take it to the next level, I think it's very helpful. And it's not helpful because you have a degree that you can show everybody. It's at least at this point, because the degree itself, the MSL degree, isn't recognized enough to have the value. Where the value of the degree is number one in the knowledge that you gain and the
Mm-hmm.
skills that you gain, because you're gonna learn a ton about the legal and regulatory framework. You're going to learn skills like doing risk assessments, writing memos, coming up with training education campaigns, building an effective compliance program. Those are all key skills. So you're just going to be more equipped so that when opportunities come your way, you're going to be able to perform at a high level. So that's, I think, the bigger value over time. Could it be that the degree is more has a market value in and of itself? Yes, over time. But the value of the program right now is equipping somebody to take the next step in their career.
It's great to know. So another question that came up was, is it possible that there's a need to distinguish this profession from the practice of law? It seems like there might be something in an overlap between what JDs and MBAs learn. For example, being a lawyer isn't necessarily a prerequisite to being an effective chief ethics and compliance officer because it involves more than just legal compliance. But what are your thoughts on that? Do you think that compliance is a profession in and of itself, or is it a kind of subset of the legal profession?
Well, I mean, I guess I think it's a little bit of both. I think there were times when lawyers did not want to be associated with compliance. And I think that's changing. I think that that lawyers like to have, when they get to a certain level, they like to have and chief compliance officer attached to their responsibilities. And I think that they see it
Mhm.
as a good thing, a status enhancing thing, something that adds to their job responsibilities in ways that they're interested in, which wouldn't have been true years ago, where it's okay, yeah, but you do compliance. So I think for many lawyers, they're happy to have a compliance formal oversight of compliance. I also think that although we can be critical of lawyers as being too lawyerly, I've just met so many lawyers who understand that success in the field requires all sorts of skills that are not traditional legal skills, and
Hmm.
are adapting.
Right.
Just because they're lawyers doesn't mean they're not good at those other things, the soft skills.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah, you don't have
it
that
ju-
part removed at
Right. They don't have that
graduation.
part removed. It's just that that's
There's
not
actually a process to remove that. It happens in
No,
law school. No,
and
I'm
and
kidding.
I totally agree with you, Bob. There's so many great lawyers that are lawyers and definitely adapting to this.
yeah. The issue though is you know I have the pleasure of meeting, because I do my own interview program, lots of great professionals. Um, Most of them are lawyers. I think the most interesting one I have met so far is not a lawyer, and never was a lawyer, and never wants to be a lawyer. In fact, at one point was a CFO,
Mm.
right? And so it's just coming at it from a very different background. And he's somebody that's happy to be a chief compliance officer and dedicate himself to being a chief compliance officer. So, I do think that the compliance is in some way a more recognized subset of being a lawyer. But there's just so many non-lawyers in the profession these days that it's got to be more than that.
What
Right.
about the what about the idea that in modern business, compliance is an element, decisions on how to comply, because 100% compliance is not always the answer. It becomes an element of risk rather than of law. I mean, there's elements of law, but do you ever see this heading toward maybe a chief risk officer function?
So it already is there in financial services,
Yeah.
where the chief risk officer is overseeing the compliance function. Um, and to your point, Dan, uh, where I think if you're looking at education, one of the things that an education program would do is teach the skill of risk assessment, but also just teach about decision decision analysis. How do you go about making decisions? And sometimes it's you're quantifying things that risks that are quantifiable, but other times there's a lot of unknowns. How do you make
Nebulous risk.
decisions? All right. How do you make decisions in periods of uncertainty? And there's going to be all right,
Like let's start with 2020.
right. Uh, and that's not a skill that's going to be unique in any way to that's what business people do.
Right.
But a compliance officer needs to be comfortable with making decisions involving risk in all sorts of environments, understanding what the role is in advising on risk, and what the role of the business is, but also how do you how do you how do you make decisions when risks are known and quantifiable? How do you make decisions when risks are known and not quantifiable? And how do you make decisions where you don't even know, what you don't know? And so
Right.
there's a lot of decision science that I think can be part of what's taught and learned to make people better. And I think that's a big part of the future direction. And I mean, in terms of other future directions, there is also that comes with it an increasing need to be comfortable with data analytics, which is,
Yes.
Lisa Beth, you mentioned at the beginning, increasing need to be thoroughly comfortable with data analytics and just leveraging data generally. A growing need to be comfortable with all the tools of AI and how it can be used to uh, enhance compliance, how it can be used to uh, not just detect misconduct that's happened, but how it can be used to detect areas that might lead um, uh, to compliance problems. So there's definitely a need to understand how to use data to help you make these decisions about risk and better evaluate risk
And do so ethically.
Right.
and do so ethically.
So there was a comment in the chat that said, I'd really like to see more chief ethics officers titles or similar titles that open this up to both lawyers and non-lawyers. One of the things that I think hopefully as this profession continues to grow and progress is that there will be needs for skills outside of just being able to interpret the law or the regulations, right? There will be needs for people who are really great at training, communication, um, like you said, data analytics, people who are really good translators from privacy or security into these fields. So I think that this will be very interesting as we go along. Another question that came in, and this one is really pointed towards the degrees. Um, a big question for someone who is in mid-career who already has a master's in something else and a few certifications, because we all have a few. Um, um, and if they want to further advance their compliance career, do you need that additional compliance master's or some other degree, or do you just need additional experience at some point?
I don't know that. I mean, look, I think that there are different ways to advance in your career, and I think what is going to be the best way to advance is going to be a very personal choice. Uh, I think that sometimes looking outside of the box uh, can be helpful. So, for example, if you are a person that is comfortable with data, um, pursuing another degree or certification in data analytics and data science can open up possibilities that wouldn't exist otherwise. That's an area that some people aren't interested in specializing in, but that for somebody who might be interested in that, and those are robust programs and not for everyone, but you could think of that. You could think of um, degrees in organizational behavior in a psychology program. Uh, some people who are very thoughtful in the compliance space have backgrounds in organizational psychology and look, I mean, our field has borrowed tremendously from the work of social scientists over the past 15, 20 years, and getting a solid grounding in that can be helpful. What I think the education in corporate compliance does is it brings it all together.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have opportunities to learn all these things, and you have an opportunity to learn the regulatory frameworks in lots of different areas, whether it's privacy or um, you know, corruption or fiduciary duties, for investment managers, and it could be a whole bunch of different areas. So you get to bring it all together. So it does depend, and everyone has to decide what is going to be their best career path for them, and it's not the right path for everyone. I think it works for a lot of people, but for some people, having um, further studies outside of compliance, as long as those skills can be transferred in, as with data analytics or organizational psychology, maybe those would be other opportunities.
So if somebody was interested in trying to see whether a program would be a right fit, What's the best way to go about it? Do you talk to people who have graduated? Do you talk to professors of the program? Is there, are programs doing Q&As where you can ask questions about like whether this seems to fit and get some career advice? Like what do you recommend to people to like what are the right questions to ask?
So I think you can look at the different websites, and by now there's probably 15 or so different programs out there, with Fordham being the best, of course. Um,
And I will say
but
we've had other speakers from
yes,
other
I know.
programs.
No, you're right. I'm allowed to say that, but with
You are
recognition.
absolutely allowed to say that.
But
Absolutely.
but with recognition that there are other programs out there, I think talking to you could talk to other people in the field and get their sense of how important it is. I think what you're going to find is a lot of people aren't aware of these programs out there, and that the level of awareness is still low. Again, something that will change over the course of years, but it's still low. Um, but you might get people who will become familiar with and have good experiences, or maybe some people who are familiar with and didn't have good experiences. Certainly, talking to students in any program, I think will can make students available. You can talk to people in charge of the programs, like me. I'm happy to talk to prospective students. These schools tend to run information sessions. So, for example, we just ran one, which was a panel discussion with recent student with current students who shared their experience, and I think that's a valuable way to gain some insight, taking a look at the curriculum and saying, is this something that I'm really interested in? This is a pretty significant investment of time and resources, and you have to do your homework to see if it's right for you. So investing and looking at the curriculum, understanding how that fits into a career path, talking to people, current students, and talking to other professionals and getting their feedback. What I will tell you that is a lot of our people who go through that rigorous study and analysis decide that it's right for them. Our program has been growing pretty rapidly. And I think there are opportunities for it to continue to grow. So I think it's a good career path. I mean, a good path for a lot of people, but it's not for everybody.
Makes a lot of sense. So with that in mind, when you think about all of the skills that we've talked about today, um, where do you think that compliance officers will need to shine going forward?
So, I mean, I could think of a few areas off the top of my head. I mean, one of the things that, the soft skills are just so fundamental for a compliance professional. And, some of those skills are teachable. And you can always work on those soft skills, but, they have to come from a base of who the individual is. But compliance officers work through indirect influence. Uh, we have few resources generally, and we need to develop partners across the organization. So being able to develop the relationships so that you can get partners who are willing to work with you to achieve compliance objectives is just a fundamental skill. Today, it will be tomorrow and forever, I think. So, that's a fundamental skill that I don't want to overlook, because it may not be the sexy skill that people talk about, but I think it is absolutely critical. Where I do see, um, a distinguishing skill is how comfortable are you with technology? How savvy are you with technology? There are a lot of opportunities for vendors out there to make your program shine. Um, but you can also invest a lot of money in technology to give you data that doesn't necessarily translate into value. And knowing how to, how to manage vendors, and knowing strategically what data you want to invest in in obtaining and the right technology tools to be able to understand data, but also, and I think this is increasingly important, how good are you at presenting data?
Mm.
And so this whole area of data visualization, which I have to say is an area that I thought about, can we teach, and we don't really teach it. But honestly, just to go back to another question you asked earlier, Lisa Beth, what are some skills you can get? I mean, there are great programs out there that we don't offer on data visualization. How can you present data in an effective way? And sometimes I marvel at some of the things I get in, you see in the news, and I think the New York Times does a great job with some of their COVID-19 data analyses in showing and presenting data in ways that are just um, that tell a story. Being able to um, tell a story with data is, requires understanding of the, in your head creatively what the stories you want to tell, but getting the data there to and putting it together in a visual is very useful. Knowing storytelling is just another important skill, because there is a limit to data and what it can convey, and there are, at that border where there's a limit of data, or what I tell my stories, data is there, but you've got to tell a story with it. And sometimes visualizing a chart is part of it, but you still need to translate that data into a story. So storytelling, data visualization, data analytics, and indirect influence. I'm not telling you anything that's new that you haven't already thought about, but I do think those are areas that are very important.
Those are all kind of passion projects for me too, because I'm a huge advocate for compliance officers not being so disconnected with the storytelling and communication.
Mhm.
But go
Well,
ahead, Dan.
well, one of the things that I struggle to even talk about it because it seems very fundamental to me, and I'm guessing to the both of you. But what's the necessity of compliance officers understanding the business that they're serving? We find this in a lot of places where people don't understand the business at all. Not talking about just compliance officers, just in general. But I think I can't help but think it's critical to this role uh, to be able to do your job effectively.
So yeah, I mean, I think that's a given, and yeah, I think one of the reasons why some of the non-lawyers are in the field is because the businesses wanted people who were deeply ingrained in the
The
business
business, right?
to be able to switch to compliance. So at one point I met with the former chief compliance officer of 3M, who came into the role with no background in compliance. She was picked up after, I think they needed to revamp their program, and she just knew the business really, really well. And she brought the program to a certain level, and then it was taken over by somebody who was a lawyer. And but she filled a need, and so I think the business recognizes that, and you're not going to advance in an organization if you don't know the business really well, and also kind of where the business is headed. And this kind of gets into another area that I've been thinking about a lot, as you know, which is ESG and
Mm-hmm.
understanding how that is going to impact your business as investors are making more demands in other areas um, that the company hasn't needed to think about from an investor perspective so much before, and having other stakeholders that have so much of a bigger voice than they did before. Um, so understanding the business today also means understanding how these forces are shaping the business going forward,
Right.
and these forces are significant.
Mm-hmm.
Which is why, as you know, we did that series, and I worked on a white paper that'll be coming out next week on this topic. And so this is another part of knowing the business is knowing the future, um, future things that are going to shape the business, and ESG. That whole area is crucial for compliance officers to get a grasp of, so that they can understand where their company is going. And I think one of the things I would say about that that makes it interesting and goes back to this issue of risk. um, because where one of the fundamental, I guess, lessons as I've dug into the topic, and really where this came clear to me was when I talked with people who switched from compliance to sustainability, is this idea that it's not just looking at risks and mitigating risks, how do you take advantage of these opportunities?
Mhm.
And having that lens of looking for opportunities is not what is common to compliance officer, but with this, when the company now is being evaluated on all these non-financial performance indicators,
Mm-hmm.
there's just many more opportunities for some strategic advantages where a compliance officer can play a role. So knowing the business, Dan, I think also means understand these future trends, and ESG is a big part of that.
Yeah, without question. Yeah, the business as it is, business how it makes money, but also how the business grows in trust, grows in reputation, grows in customers.
Absolutely. And I think um, as you're talking about that, I'm just reminded, right? You can't understand the risk if you don't understand the business. You can't communicate as a storyteller unless you understand your audience, and your audience is driven by their objectives of the business. So
Mm-hmm.
it kind of all comes together. We have one more question that came in through the chat, and then then I think we're having Dan ask our signature question. It's a kind of quick yes or no. Do you think a CCO is on par with being a GC at this point?
Not yet. In general, it could vary by sector, but no, I don't think so yet. I don't know that we'll get there. Um, so, I mean, if I have to quickly explain it, I mean, look, the GC role has been around for
A really
forever,
long time.
right? And come on, compliance is a young field, and it's not really a competition. It really isn't a competition. And I think that if you are looking to be at the same level of the GC, and that's the uh, motivating factor, I don't think that's the right way to look at this career path. It's how can we add value to the organization? And I mean, it's clear that a person who's ahead of compliance can contribute to the organization, but I just I don't think we're there yet, and it doesn't trouble me that it's not the same stature of a GC role.
Yeah, the me of 20 years ago never would have thought. Although I say don't lose hope, because the me of 20 years ago would have thought you'd see chief information security officers reporting to CEOs. But we're starting to. But it's also a double-edged sword. It comes with a whole bunch of things that make the job a lot more complicated. So, and a lot of it's organizational dependent. So thanks for some great questions, everybody that's contributed those, and Bob, some great answers. But as we always do, we finish out each episode, each event with the same question, and that is, what is the best thing you've ever learned from a mentor?
So I laugh because Elizabeth told me about this, and I was supposed to give it some thought, and so I'm just answering
She
this
didn't tell
on the
you that you're supposed
fly.
to pretend as though it's the first time you've heard it, though, right?
But it
What? I wasn't
effectively is.
expecting this question.
So I guess the most useful piece of advice that I got from somebody was to get out of your comfort zone and be comfortable being uncomfortable. Um, and I think that where I see in my own career, the areas where that I think could have gone better is because there was too much comfort with what I was doing, and challenging yourself for something that you're not good at, to expand and to think ahead of what do I need for the next 5 years, and not just what am I good at today, is probably the advice that I think was most useful, and the advice that I often share with others who ask.
Extremely valuable advice.
There was a lot of advice in there, actually. I'm going to have fun putting some social tiles together for this. Thank you. Thank you, Bob. This has been these sessions are always my favorite part of the week. But having you here today was really exceptional. And so thank you for giving your time and for speaking about this important topic. I know that we love providing this to the community, and we think that it's great that you are willing to come on and be our guest.
Well, it's been my pleasure. I really, again, commend you for what you guys have started, and wish you continued success. I think you're part of the growing professionalization of compliance and ethics. I wish you really both success with Mentor Core, and thank you very much for the invitation.